Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's Information Studies 752 lecture, where we will be talking about websites. All right, so here are our weekly topics for this week. What resources contribute to useful websites? Why are websites important for archives? Why are websites important for researchers? What information should archivists make available and easy to find on an archive's website? And how should this information be presented? So we'll start by looking at resources, which is a recurring theme in this course. So talking about the different types of archival infrastructure that we have discussed. And so we'll just pick out a few of these to kind of focus on in relation to archival websites. And one interesting one that cropped up, especially in the Johnson reading for this week, was placement of the archives within organization and its freedom of action. So in that article, there was a tension between the university that the librarians worked for and the desire by the librarians who are helping redesign the website, who wanted features that were beneficial for the people to be using the website and differed from the main wishes or main interests of people in marketing who kind of thought of actually being able to use the website as secondary to having a website that sort of fit with the university brand and all that stuff. And ultimately, in the article, for the most part, the librarians went out. They were able to have the freedom within their organization, within the university that they work for in Indiana, to spend the time to develop and implement resources and features in their website that they felt would be most useful for the researchers. And perhaps if the library had been less regarded, there might have been more pushback, and maybe they would have been told to just kind of toe the line a little bit more. I think they said they ended up making a couple of changes, but they were surprised by how little pushback they got. And if the library or in an archive was sort of poorly regarded by its host institution, then someone might say, marketing or whatever might say, well, this is how it's going to be, and we don't really care if it has these features that you want or if it doesn't. Another interesting thing in the Johnson article was the authors talked about there was a reluctance by the marketing department to even listen to the library about website design. So maybe they weren't terribly highly regarded. It could have just been that the marketing people were busy getting every other website designed. But time is a resource, right? And getting the attention and time of other people that you need in order for your outreach to be successful, that is something that is going to be easier if you are an archive that is highly regarded as opposed to being one that is just kind of ignored and not really thought of as being very important within an institution. So again, it goes back to outreach and advocacy to make sure that your archive is in the strongest position possible so that when it does have ideas, when it does need the time of people in marketing and whoever else you need to work within your institution, that they'll be more likely to give you the time that your archive needs. Another interesting thing about the Johnson article is the authors talked about, they did take care to make sure that the design of the of their website match other university pages. So this is something that is important, that the Lynch and Horton articles touched on, having kind of consistency across the website and within web pages. So that's just kind of like good website design, but it also shows you're kind of pulling in the same direction as everyone else and that you understand that you're sort of a partner within this institution and it's just kind of a good way to play nice and make sure that your archive stays highly regarded and that it doesn't become a department or a unit that people think of as being sort of problematic or difficult to work with, right? Because that's going to is really going to lower your placement within an organization, which might result in your archive having less freedom of action. So, it seems like the authors struck a good balance of advocating for themselves and advocating for their researchers while also taking steps to maintain their placement within the university and not infringing on their potential freedom of action in the future. If they had kind of gone rogue and said, well, we're not really going to implement any of these designs, and maybe it had been more of a laborious process to have things meet the expectations and standards of the university, then in the future, the archives might have more difficulty in getting to do what it wants, right? So it's always good to play nice and make sure that people sort of see you as being helpful and kind of rowing in the same direction, and that can free up resources and opportunities for you in the future. Next, I'll talk about relationships with other individuals and organizations. And that's one that the Johnson article touches on in a couple of instances as well. So the authors talk about working with IT staff to get their website or their webpage up and running, and that's certainly a valuable partnership to have for archives in a variety of different ways, whether it's a website or digital preservation or um, online collections. A lot of ways for that relationship to be important for archives. Um, and the Johnson article also talks about working with IRB, Institutional Review Board staff, to develop usability tests when they were trying to make sure that their archive, that the website was as useful for researchers as possible. So again, that's kind of another relationship that you have to develop as well. If you have a bad relationship with IT, then they might say, well, we're too busy. We have all these other websites to fix, and good luck. If you have a bad relationship with the IRB people for some reason, maybe you have kind of gone over their head in the past, or whatever has happened, then they might kind of drag their feet and say, well, this isn't really a priority for us right now, so come back in 6 months when we might have more time. So no archive can go at it alone, and it's certainly valuable to maintain these relationships. And again, part of that is reaching out and letting people knowing what you're doing and why you're doing it, and demonstrating why your archive is important, why the use that you want to make of another individual's or department's time is going to be valuable for researchers, for the institution. And again, that just goes back to outreach and advocacy to develop and maintain these relationships. Okay, and the last one that we'll focus on is staff. The Johnson article briefly discusses how their website redesign was more difficult because they had lost a staff member. So, the more people you have working on a project, obviously, the less time other people are going to have to work on it, and the more time they have to do other things that an archive needs to do. The Johnson article also mentions staff taking time to review other websites for useful features that they might implement in their website or their webpage. So again, just if you're talking about the expenditure of staff time in doing something like developing a webpage, this seems like something that is good to do, but can certainly consume resources. Deciding which library websites to look at or which archive websites to look at. Having some kind of way to record your thoughts and impressions about what you see and what you think is good and what isn't good. So, there can be a laborious process depending on how many websites you look at. And ideally, you want to look at more than a few, right? The Johnston article also touches on staff experience and expertise being lassoed and implemented into design decisions. So there were times where they didn't really have great feedback from students about which features were usable and which features should be included. So they had to kind of rely on their experience as people who had taught and had some experience working in the library themselves, right? So expertise is definitely a very valuable staff resource that can be brought to bear really in everything that an archive does, including website design. And then the Johnson article also talks about checking and providing updated information. So making sure that everything that they're putting into their redesigned website was actually current and wasn't old and out of date and irrelevant. Obviously, that's beneficial because you want your patrons, you want people viewing your website to have the most up-to-date and accurate information as possible. And if you have information that is outdated, it doesn't really present your archive in the best way, and it can kind of lead people, researchers, stakeholders alike, in viewing your archives as not being very competent, and obviously that can be damaging, as we talked about, for advocacy and outreach purposes. To get back to this idea of having staff influence on what websites look like, I think that's an important one because oftentimes it's staff members themselves who are going to be using the website more than even patrons and researchers might use the website. Like if you're getting reference requests, then you're the one that is going to have to go through the website to find what you're looking for in most instances. So that's a really helpful tool. And again, it's an expenditure of time. Um, it's I would say something that can take some organization and planning to touch on a couple of other types of infrastructure, but I feel like it can be a really beneficial thing to include, and you can extend that to online collections and online findings as well, which we'll touch on later in this semester. Okay, so next we'll talk more generally about why are websites important for archives. This is something that the Pidal article touches on a little bit when he talks about how websites can direct researchers to resources needed to meet their information need. So, that's obviously a valuable process and one that archives want to have go as smoothly as possible, right? You want to provide the least number of errors between your researchers and the information that they're looking for, or they're just going to get fed up, they're going to get frustrated and say, okay, well, I'm just going to skip going to this archive because their website is crappy and I can't find anything that I want. And that's why Pidal has those features on websites that he feels are important because they are ones that are going to reduce the barriers between researchers going to an archives website and finding the information that they need as much as possible. Just overall, a website, if it's done well, can demonstrate the value and competence of the archives. If you go, as I sort of touched on a minute ago, if you go to an archive and you have out of date information, or it just looks kind of unprofessional, it looks like someone that did it in their spare time, it doesn't paint a very compelling picture of an archive that is going to help you meet your information need, or it's not going to paint a very compelling picture of an archive that you as a stakeholder want to support. So in a lot of ways, websites may not be the first impression that a person gets of an archive, right? Typically, you're going to come through social media, or there has to be some at least superficial level of awareness of an archive before you come to the website. So it may not be the first impression of the archive that a researcher gets, but it might be one of the most lasting and one of the most important ones because, it's going to be the one that is going to help you or not help you connect with information that is going to help you do your research. And if that experience is smooth, then it's going to make you feel good about the archive. If it's rough for whatever reason, then that's going to make you feel not great about the archive. And that can really influence your decision about whether or not you're going to use the archive or potentially support it in the future. So just from the impression that websites can leave about an archive to a researcher, that really connects with this idea of them being important things to consider, and that's why I discuss them in this course because I think that they're kind of overlooked as a type of archival outreach in a lot of ways, but they can be connections between researchers and your archives that can shape their opinion of your archive positively or negatively. So I feel like it's important to talk about that both those possibilities. So next we'll talk about why are websites important for researchers. And as the title article discusses, essentially they can be great tools for facilitating preparations for an on-site visit. That's what all the features in the title article are focused on is how can we allow researchers to come into our archives and be ready to go from day one, have the information that they need, have the materials that they need pulled, have all of the information about policies and procedures from reference staff sort of understood. How can we make our researchers ready to just sit down and get right to work? And that can be a really important thing. If you're a researcher and you're traveling to an archive, that it's going to cost money to stay in a hotel, it's going to cost money to eat, and it's going to cost money to travel, sometimes a lot of money to travel. So you want to make sure that when someone gets there, they're not continuing to kind of struggle through issues that they should have been able to resolve in the first place if your website was as good as it was, and if it included some of the features that Vital talks about. So just from a preparedness point of view, a good website can make or break how well a researcher, again, is able to kind of go in and just sit down and get to work. I kind of think it's interesting that the Vital article touches on on-site visits because I feel like a lot of researchers are probably going to access archives information online. And so it would be interesting to see kind of a corollary article about what features would be really beneficial for preparing people to just find stuff on your website, like finding your finding aids, finding your online collections, your policies, and all that. I feel like there would be a lot of overlap, but it would be interesting to see what features uh, would be different or how those features that Pydo provides would be described differently. So that might be an interesting kind of follow-up to the Pydo article. Next, we'll talk about what information should archivists make available and easy to find on an archive's website. In a lot of ways, you can break down what the different features that the Pydo article suggests in a couple of different categories. So how to find information about collection holdings and how to get help. So being able to search for the information that you're looking for about records, about collections, and also how can you get in touch with reference staff if you have any questions about anything. So those are certainly two types of information that should be kind of universally easy to find. And I think that's true whether or not you are planning an on-site visit or if you're just going to use an archive's online resources. But I think that there are some other things that an archive's website should convey as well. So if your archive has resources that they want to highlight, like collections or um, workshops or things like that that are coming up that your archive is really investing a lot of resources in and really wants to gin up interest for, those should be highlighted as well, right? If you're going to take the time to develop an exhibit or develop a workshop, it'd be kind of silly to just hide it in, the darkest corners of your website and not make that information readily available to researchers sort of right off the bat. And then what to highlight can be viewed through an advocacy lens. So if you know that someone in your institution that is a potential stakeholder really likes X collection, highlight the heck out of the fact that you have X collection and make sure that they and everyone else knows it so you can get a lot of people interested in it and a lot of people using it because that's going to reflect well on your repository. Certainly online resources, so online finding aids, online collections, that's, and for the most part, what people are going to be looking for to see what information your archive has, what collections it has, what records it has. So you certainly want to highlight those. Things like new acquisitions, if you want to say, hey, maybe a quick little story about an important collection that you just acquired. Again, kind of thinking about what is really going to resonate with people in my community or within my institution. It's helpful to have your social media links. So if people want to follow you on Twitter and so on, that would be a helpful little nudge towards your social media to kind of get people engaging with that. So yeah, you just have to think about, you have to think strategically about what you want to highlight on your website. Again, there are probably some pretty basic things that you absolutely should, and those are some of the things that the title article touches on. And then there are some other things that are maybe a little bit more discretionary in ways that you can think more strategically about what you're going to highlight and what information or what activities your archive has is going to paint it in the best light with the people that you want to impress and that you want to get invested in your archive. So again, it just goes back to this possibility of websites as an outreach tool, right? Not just showing that you're competent and that you can create a good website, but also that you provide resources that people might find valuable, that you have collections that people might find valuable, that you're reaching out to the public through workshops. Just things that can really portray your archive in a positive way. So now I'll touch briefly on how should the information in an archive's website be presented. And here's where you get into a lot of the things that the mentioned Horton chapters for this week talked about. So things like universal usability, interface design, page structure, and so on. Won't go into them too much because I'm going to discuss them in the next part of this lecture when I look at the American Heritage Center's website and talk about what I see from that perspective and from the perspective of the title article as well. But the success that you have in presenting the information in your archive is going to be the main thing that is going to leave a positive or negative impression on researchers and on stakeholders. So again, if information is presented really well, if you have information architecture that is really thoughtful, if you have navigation features and things like page design and interface design that are really appealing, that's going to go a long way towards making people feel like your archive is an institution that they want to use, and of course, vice versa as well. So, not only do you have to have the information, but you need to present it well, and you need to present it in an appealing way, in a way that adheres to a lot of the standards and sort of wisdom and common knowledge out there. And again, that's something that the Lynch and Horton chapters discuss, and things that I'll touch on in the second part of this lecture. And finally, to go back to this idea of what resources contribute to useful archives, you won't be surprised here to hear me mention assessment and resources put towards assessing the virtues and or sins of your archive's website. And that's something that the Johnson article, to its credit, focuses on a fair amount. So they talk about, again, getting feedback from staff using the website. So, hey, I was using this the other day, and I feel like this navigation could be set up a little bit better. Or I feel like these pages could be linked a little more clearly, or I feel like this information is a little difficult to find. That's certainly a really valid form of feedback, and it's something that you can get from all of your staff and everyone that is using the website throughout the day. The Johnson article also talks about getting continuous feedback from students. So, not just doing an assessment of your website once or twice, but having a sort of continuous process where you are getting feedback from people that are using your website. So maybe having like a form that they can fill out, having some way where you can maybe track how long it takes people to come into your website and find what they're looking for. So things like usability studies, or even if there's some sort of tool within uh, the uh, the website app or program that you're using that can track that information for you, it'd be extremely valuable to have this continuous evaluation, because then if you do change things, you can see whether or not that results in people maybe spending less time looking at what they're finding, or if your changes are actually helping, or if you maybe need to consider doing something else. And as we've touched on throughout the semester, and we'll talk more about this next week, you need to know what you're assessing. So, are you trying to get an assessment of how easy it is to navigate through your website? And if so, that's something that you need to make sure to ask in your assessment, right? If you want to know if the graphics and colors and other things that you use are appealing, that's something that you need to ask in your assessment. So you need to make sure that the feedback that you're getting matches the information that you're trying to get out of the assessment process, right? If you're just sort of asking people questions and you don't really know why, or you don't really know what information you're trying to find out, then it can be a less valuable process than if you are thinking, okay, well, we're really interested in learning about how our information hierarchies look, and are they sort of intuitive to people, or are they difficult to figure out? And we see people kind of struggling to get down to the information that they're looking for. So let's make sure that that's something that we ask people in our usability studies, or something that we try and track through our website program or application. And then, obviously, as I said, that's something that you can kind of track over time as you hopefully adjust things to get the results when you assess students and other people. You get the results that you're looking for. And if you're not getting what you're looking for, then you need to kind of figure out why that is and what you can change. But again, as with all things related to outreach, assessment is really important, given the importance that a website can have for an archive, as it can serve as one of the more public-facing impressions that your archive will have out there in the public. You need to make sure that you're doing it well. And if you're not doing it well, you need to know why, and you need to know how you can correct it. Again, it takes time, it takes effort to do things like usability studies. But I feel like it's infrastructure well spent, and use of infrastructure that is going to help your archives be as successful as it can be. Okay, so that's it for this part of the lecture. In the next part of the lecture, we will look at the American Heritage Center at the University of Wyoming's website and see how well they meet the features that Pidal described, and just overall uh, adherence to some of the navigation and hierarchy and design elements that the Lynch and Horton article suggests are important. Okay, so as promised, here is the website for the University of Wyoming's American Heritage Center, sort of the homepage for the AHC. And the Lynch and Horton articles suggest, or chapters suggest, that homepages have 4 primary elements. So identity, navigation, timeliness or content focus, and tools. So this homepage does a good job of conveying the identity of the American Heritage Center. So there's a nice picture of the Centennial Complex, which is where the AHC is housed. It kind of shows the general color scheme and other visual clues that that we'll see throughout the rest of this website. We'll talk about navigation in a second. The content focus is pretty good too. So it really focuses on, here are the virtual resources you can use. Here's some information about visiting us. Here are ways that you can explore the collections, and it has some additional resources down here more related to outreach, things that the AHC is involved with. There's a featured collection, so kind of focusing on specific collections that the AHC houses. There are some important links down here. I guess I don't really know why, if these are important links, if they aren't located closer to the top or off to the side. I mean, if they're important, it seems like something that you would want to highlight sort of right off the bat without making people kind of scroll down through, especially this thing. Like, this is just way too big. And it really, it takes effort to kind of scroll through and then, okay, these are important links, so why aren't they easier to find? Then there's an About Us section, so you can find some connections to the AHC social media things. You can sign up for the newsletter if you want. And then there is a nice footer here. So there are some useful directories here. So like I said, you can connect to some of the virtual resources that the AHC offers. Some things about how to visit, how to explore collections. So really kind of the main things that the AHC is involved with. What isn't present on this this homepage, unfortunately, is a search option. So if you came to the homepage and you were like, okay, I know what I want, I just want to be able to type in and search what I'm looking for, there's not really an option to do that here. I guess you can kind of look through all these and see if it's something that if any of these links lead to something that you want, but it'd probably be just more efficient to have a search option at the very top that researchers can just use and kind of not have to scroll through all this stuff to find what they're looking for. There is a search thing up here, but this actually does a search for the entire University of Wyoming website and not just the American Heritage Center. So, I guess if you look long enough, you might find what you're looking for, but you're gonna have to go through a lot of stuff before you actually find what you want. So I touched on navigation a little bit already. It's kind of annoying to have to scroll through all this stuff to try and find what you're looking for. There's not a search thing that can help you navigate directly to where you want. There's not something, at least immediately obvious, that allows you to see sort of all the different pages within the website that you can go to. I mean, sure, they're kind of chunked up here, but it's always helpful to have some kind of menu that shows sort of everywhere that you can go so that researchers can access that. If you do scroll all the way down to the very bottom of the footer, there is a web page sitemap, which will take you to this menu, which shows all these, really everything on the map, right? But unless you know to scroll all the way down here and click on web page sitemap,
you're probably not going to realize that that's an option. So that's another problem too. This should be much more obvious for researchers to find and look at in order to be able to navigate as quickly to where they want to go, as easily as possible. So yeah, there are some definite pros and cons to this homepage. Okay, so let's explore the navigation through the website a little bit further. The information architecture that the Lynch and Horton chapters, some of the Lynch and Horton chapters focus on. So the idea of click depth, so how many clicks are required to reach a given page, having direct access, having things like feedback and dialogue to show you sort of exactly where you are within the website. So let's click on the RRAD sessions, which I'm not even really sure what that is. They should probably explain what RRAD is. And that takes us to a website about, I guess, remote research and discovery. You might not know that unless you actually get to this page and read that. And then we have a nice little menu here that we can look at, which is good. But this doesn't really show you within this menu where you are. So are you within the about the AHC menu? And also what's frustrating is this menu doesn't drop down. So there are actually other options within these hierarchies that you can't see unless you actually click on the page itself. So for instance, if you go to collections, then all these things are available, but they're not available if you just hover over them. And it's like you may not realize that Discover Our Collections is there, or Anaconda Geological Documents is housed under collections. So there really should be some way that this drops down and you can see all these options instead of having to click on collections to see what these options are. So that's definitely something that can lead people to be confused and not really sure about where the information that they want is actually located. There are some things within this website that are redundant. So here we have an exhibits page, so current exhibits of the HC. And then if you go down to education and outreach, there is also an exhibits page, which I'm not sure why there are two separate pages about exhibits. So that's a little confusing, especially since some of these resources are ones that they mention in this exhibits page. So that can definitely be kind of confusing, and I just don't know why it's set up that way. Another thing which is frustrating and inconsistent is the location of this search option. So you can use this search option to find what you're looking for. So for instance, earlier when I was looking around, I decided to search by browse collections by subject area, and it will take you to results just within the AHC itself that can actually be useful to help you find what you're looking for, which is good. But what's interesting is this isn't an option for all these pages. So for example, if you go back to this exhibits, that search option disappears. I don't know why. So sometimes you have the option to search what you're looking for, but other times you don't have the option to search what you're looking for. And I don't understand why that is the case. So there are definitely some navigational issues, some issues with consistency across the website. It's probably more difficult to get to certain parts of this website than it really needs to be if there were kind of simple things like a drop-down menu or that search option available universally instead of in selective parts of this website. So I also have a contact us, which is fine, but then they have some of the information down here as well, so that's a little bit redundant too. Breadcrumbing is something that Lynch and Horton mentions as far as a good navigational tool, and there is some of that here. So you can kind of go to back and forth from the main page to whatever you were looking at before. So that's helpful. If you go back to research services here, let's go ahead and click on products of HC Research. So you can go back to research services and then back to the HC. So there is a little bit of breadcrumbing. The overall aesthetic is pretty consistent, like the colors are consistent. So that helps you sort of have an understanding of where you are as well within the website. So yeah, that's fine. But yeah, there are definitely some navigational issues that get in the way of accessing information as quickly and efficiently as you probably should be able to. The contrast is good, which is something that the Lynch and Horton article mentions in page design. There's good color and contrast, so that's pretty good. Generally speaking, on the pages, there is a good contrast between or a good balance between images and text, although sometimes there is some text and no images. So that's pretty good. I guess sometimes I don't know, it just seems like its website feels a little amateurish to me in some ways. It just feels like kind of like clunky and poorly organized, and you know, I know that the HC is a great archive with a lot of great material, but it's just not presented terribly well from the homepage sort of forward, which is really too bad. So yeah, there's definitely some room for improvement, especially when it comes to the information architecture, and really that's probably the most important thing, right? To provide an efficient way for your researchers to find what they're looking for. So yeah, a decent website, I would say, but one with definite room for improvement and kind of more consistency as far as what is available and when. Okay, so yeah, essentially what I just did, looking at the Lynch and Horton chapters and connecting them to the HC's website, that's what you can do for your repository outreach review. And the repository outreach review, if you choose the website option, also asks you to evaluate how well your institution's website connects to the different criteria that the PIDL article has as far as websites that facilitate on-site use. So I'll spend the next little while looking at some of those components and connecting them to the AHC's website as well. So the first component that the PIDL article mentions is ask questions. So how able are researchers? How well are researchers able to post questions to the archive staff through the website? So an online form gets 4 points, instant message gets 3 points, and linked email gets 3 points. So kind of suggesting that an online form is the best. There is a way to set up Zoom consultations. So you can contact the HC through an email to do that. So that is an example of linked email. There's this virtual research hub. So if you click on ask a question, you can submit a form here. And so, that's the online form that PIDL is talking about. So there are a few different ways that you can get in touch with the AHC and their reference staff in order to ask a question. So it looks like there's a more detailed form here that you can fill out. So I don't really know why there are 2 forms. I don't know why it just doesn't go to this one if it's more detailed, but I guess I guess it's better to have two than to have none, right? So, okay, so that's pretty good. The next component is browse holdings information. So measures the ability to find linked collection lists or lists. So 10 points if the collection lists are linked to finding aids with container lists. 3 points if you get collection lists but not linked to finding aids or container lists. This is something that the HC actually does pretty well too. So if you go back to the home page and you look under Explore Collections, you can find a link to the AHC's finding aids. So let's go ahead and click here. What is kind of weird is it takes you to this Archives West website. I guess this is some kind of consortium that the AHC is involved with. But it does take you right to finding aids that are just related to the AHC, and you can search through those. And they do have container lists associated with them. So yeah, that's actually pretty good too. It's pretty efficient to find a link to finding aids with container lists. So that's pretty good too. So that we would award the full 10 points for. The next criteria is search holdings information. So how well are you able to query collections information? So if the search box is on the main page, it's 7 points. If it's on subpage, it's on 3 points. You know, as we discussed, it's not on the home page, so you kind of have to dig a little bit before you find a search box that actually searches just the AHC's resources. So that's probably the 3 points for having a search box on a subpage. I'm tempted to say it's like 1.5 points because it's not on all the subpages, it's just on some of them, which is really strange. So we'll say 1.5 points for meeting this particular criteria. So the next one that we'll look at is the view search results information component, which measures the types of information provided that allow researchers to evaluate the relevancy of search holdings. So let's go ahead and jump back into the menu. Again, you have to kind of scroll all the way down here to find this menu, which is just kind of bizarre to me. So let's see. Yep. Okay. So this one does have the search option. So measures the types of information provided that allow researchers to evaluate the relevancy of search results. Okay, so again, if we search browse collections by subject, it does have a date range, so that's helpful to determine if what you're looking for is helpful. Some of the results that the PIDL article mentions for this this criteria are collection title with link to finding aid, things like inclusive dates, link to summary information, link to background, scoping content, folder list, physical extent. So it might be more helpful to see if we can do a search for a specific collection that the AHC has. So let's do a search for Ellen Simpson papers. Okay, so it's not bringing up a find aid right away. Okay, political collections. So again, it's not like terribly efficient, but eventually we can get to the Ellen Simpson papers. And this does go to the find aid for that collection. So yeah, pretty good overall. Again, it's not the most efficient process to go through, but I think we can give points for all of these different components. So pretty good there. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We'll say 8. Okay, just kind of keeping score here. Table 5, accumulate selected information. I don't really see any way to do that. There's no like shopping cart or anything that, at least as far as I can see, you can kind of put things in your shopping cart and kind of keep all of your desired information together. So we'll say that's a 0. Save selected information. I don't really see any way to do that, at least through the website. I don't see any way to create an account to store selected information. Download or export it, email it. Let's take a look here, actually. So just popping into a random, I guess you can print, so maybe you can also save the online finding aids if you would like. So I guess we can give points for download, export selected information, although again, it's kind of a convoluted process. So yeah, I'll give 1 point for that because you can sorta, but it's not through the search results that you actually type in. Like if I do a search and I find something about the Alan Simpson papers, there's not a way for me to kind of save that directly. The next table is review information about planning a research visit. This is something that the agency does pretty well. So there's this visit us, there's a visit guide, and contact us. So information about how to have materials available for you, information about how to register, not things that Pidal mentions, but things that are pretty important nonetheless. If you go back to the home page, there is information about parking, about the location, the hours that the reading room is open, the address, all that stuff. I don't really see any directions here. Fee schedules. Let's see if that is in the how to visit guide. Yeah, I don't really see any fee schedules or anything like that. So we'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We'll say 8 out of a possible 9, so that's pretty good. Schedule a research appointment. This is pretty good. You can do the on-site research application form. So that's the schedule an appointment online with automatic confirmation. There's no way to use IM as far as I can tell. You can send a link. So I guess we'll count both of those for 6. Request materials for an appointment. Again, going back to this idea of the on-site research application form, which allows you to provide a date, and then you can actually go in and let them know which information you would like to have available for you when you arrive. So fill in an online form, that's worth 2 points. So yeah, as far as providing the information contained in Pidal's article, the agency actually does pretty well. And there's a lot that is really helpful for setting up an online visit. Kind of the frustrating thing is finding exactly where this stuff is, unless you've kind of poked around a fair amount. Again, can be pretty difficult because of the lack of drop-down menus and the lack of a search tool, which kind of varies from page to page and isn't present on the home page. So if you can find what you're looking for, it's great. And they do a good job of sort of highlighting the important stuff at the top, which is definitely beneficial. So yeah, the navigation isn't great. In some respects, it looks a little bit amateurish, but if you can find it, the information that's there and the resources that are there are useful. So yeah, kind of a mixed bag. You know, definitely some positives, definitely some negatives. You know, not every website is going to be perfect. If I was a researcher, I would say this is probably good enough, and you more or less can find what you're looking for. So yeah, this isn't a website that would make you say, I'm never going to use this archive in my life. You know, sometimes you just have to get your foot in the door and let good enough be good enough and sort of wow researchers with the resources that you have and your reference services and your online collections. And then even if the website experience wasn't perfect, you can still sort of make up for it in other ways. So, okay, so again, this kind of analysis is something that you can do for your repository outreach review. So just keep that in mind. And let me know if you have any questions or comments. And of course, take care, and I will talk to you soon.